Hi, I'm Julia Ain-Krupa, and this is the Impatient Moviegoer. Today I want to talk to you about The Zone of Interest. A masterwork by Jonathan Glazer, this is a film that I am still processing even after several months and multiple viewings, for it isn't easy to know. The Zone of Interest is a place unlike any we have seen. It may take distant cues from its cinematic ancestors. I see a hint of Von Trier's Melancholia, of the soundtracks of certain works by Polanski, of The Conformist, I'm Love, and even Jean Diamant, but as I said before, the film stands alone. What we are given is a landscape corroding from the inside. As some of the final shots of Nazi officer Rudolf Hess, aka Rudy, here perfectly embodied by actor Christian Friedel, will reveal. It is bile, it is vomit, and it is soot. This world is one grand facade, a charade of elegant home life lived out on the Auschwitz grounds, with each polished detail upholding a greater lie. The contrast of beauty as it conceals horror, of the domestic realm as it coexists, blind to neighboring atrocities. This is a life built on the bodies of the dead. Ashes spread to fertilize their paradise garden. One of many sick details of the truth hidden in plain sight. This is also what makes The Zone of Interest so deeply unsettling and so compelling as a film. Here we have a portrayal of the Holocaust unlike any we have seen, because there is absolutely nothing sentimental in the world that we are presented. Cold and unemotional, we, the audience, are tuned into the horror that is so blatantly overlooked. What we are shown is the mentality behind the machine, the rhythm of everyday life, so average, so plain, so terribly cruel in its ignorance of what lies just beyond. Presented with a portrait of total apathy, we are forced to consider our own humanity, or lack thereof. And I believe this is what, in part, Zone of Interest is forcing us to do. After our initial entrance into this world, when a murky blank screen casts us into a choral realm of haunting voices, delivering us to another earth, one that many of us have heard about and dreaded all our lives, we arrive at the Hess home, a place that at first glance seems so idyllic, but that is made horrible by what lies beyond. There is a hum that we feel from the start. It is the rumble of airplanes overhead, the punctuation of guns fired in the distance, the deep growl of a chamber of death. We know that we are about to watch a film about Auschwitz, and yet we are not fully prepared to witness a depiction of indifference in action. In some way, is that more horrible than the thing itself? It is forever hard to accept how, for a Nazi officer and his family, life can remain business as usual, and yet somehow it does. This is a family that capitalizes off the Auschwitz machine. Watch as the banality with which they exist becomes almost relatable in its self-absorption. And so it is for many reasons that we squirm in our seats. The Hess family is given a beautiful house and garden, titles and prestige. No matter that one of their servants washes a last trace of blood from Rudolph's riding boots in a garden sink, we still can see. Rudolph speaks of their collective sacrifice, telling his children that he won't be home for their birthdays that year, as he's been called to another mission. If only the children understood why, or do they? We wonder about this as one of his sons recoils from the window behind a curtain while playing alone in his room. We're not quite sure what he has seen, but we suspect we have a sense. Their daughter often sits in the hallway at night staring out the window or off into space. Her father picks her up and carries her to bed, reading her a bedtime story, as any decent parent would do. In fact, it is reported that Hess was a devoted father, yet another example that brings him uncomfortably close to us and us to him. It is hard to believe that these children are oblivious to the circumstances that surround them, and yet it seems that perhaps they are, at least in part. Of course, there will be a cost for their somnambular denial. Those who dwell in and visit the Hess household do not lift an eyebrow. They simply drink their tea. At the start of the film, the family lounges by a stream, walking home through a nearby forest on a summer's day, relaxed and together at peace. This might be a picturesque setting were it not for the disturbing fact that we, the audience, know we are near Auschwitz, where more than 1 million systematic killings are taking place. There is nothing comfortable about this setting. Rudolph's wife, Hedwig, or as he calls her, Mutzi, which means little sweetheart in German, expertly portrayed by Sandra Hüller, loves her life and her appropriated furs, her perfumes and jewels, her trips abroad, strolls about her garden, her baby in her arms, admiring an assortment of flowers. She asks the child, dipping the child's face into a blossom, she says, "Would you like to smell a rose?" And I cannot help but feel that we are being asked the same question. Would we like to explore beauty? Would we like to shut our eyes and our ears to the realities of the world, to understand the cost? Later on in the film, we will enter the pigmented petals of a dahlia to be immersed in a blaring moment of color and sound that envelops us in the undercurrent. Is it the afterlife, the ultimate scream? Is it that world beyond the wall that we are hearing and feeling? The cacophony of voices may be largely concealed, but as I have already said, it is still ever present. For as we quickly discover, the zone of interest is a place haunted by omission, which only highlights what is left out, extreme beauty underlying the horror and decay. And this is so unnerving, for as we become engrossed in the everyday detail of domestic life, we hold our breath, waiting to be shown the truth. As viewers, we strain to listen for and see that other world. We brace ourselves. We get a glimpse of the smoldering smoke emitted from chimneys in the distance, beyond the wall. At one point, signaling alignment with the burning ember of Rudy's cigarette as he stands in the garden at dusk and takes a puff. Fire, fire, everywhere. This is the truth. The one that we don't see when Rudy carries his daughter off to bed or cuts the cake for his children after supper, or when he calls his wife on the phone, looking for her attention and love. The truth is fire, is murder, is Rudy standing on a balcony overlooking a lavish Nazi ball, wondering what it would take to strategically gas them all. A casual thought for him, one that he mentions in passing on the phone. So I could talk for hours about the precision with which this story is conveyed. Tell you about the scene where Hedwig casually distributes a package of women's undergarments among her Polish housekeepers, or when she threatens to have one of her servants' ashes spread across a field if she doesn't obey, or when Rudy finds a fragment of human bone in a nearby stream, and how they scrub the children's bodies raw to ensure no contamination, and on, but there is one scene in particular that stands out to me. It is subtle and most chilling. It is when Hedwig's mother comes to visit, and Hedwig takes her for a tour through her, quote, paradise garden, as her mother calls it, showing her every flower and vegetable with pride. Hedwig tells her mother how Rudy jokingly refers to her as the Queen of Auschwitz, a nickname she laughs off with delight, for she has finally found the decadent life she always felt she deserved. And when that lavish lifestyle is threatened, she tells Rudy that they will have to drag her out of the house with force. This is her home, and she cares not about anyone else, and certainly not about the human cost. As Hedwig walks with her mother, in the distance we see the tops of buildings peeking out over the barrier wall. Hedwig's mother speaks casually about the curtains she wished she could have bought from her former employer, a Jewish woman named Esther Silberman, whose house she used to clean. She was outbid at the sale, she says. Of course we know what this means. Maybe she's over there, her mother suggests, seemingly unaware of the liquidation of Jews that is taking place. It would not be so funny if she knew. When Hedwig's mother later discovers the truth of what is taking place, she disappears from her daughter's home, leaving a note. She's the only one who refuses to uphold the charade. Another stunning moment takes place with the creative use of a thermal imaging camera as a means to underscore the danger and panic of this reality, establishing a fairy tale-like interlude. Hansel and Gretel fighting against the witch that is, in fact, the horrors of the world. Not only does this film, which was loosely adapted from Martin Amis's book of the same name, give new insight to the everyday aspects of the domestic life of Nazis, but done so in the hands of a masterful auteur, this story becomes the kind of art that can change you. That's how I see this film. With its brilliant choice of music and its soundscape, the zone of interest renders me speechless, such as when a wash of color illustrates an operatic height of feeling. This moment is made by the music of composer Mika Levy, whose contribution is essential to the film. Levy conveys the spiraling horror. A crescendo mounts through an ascending melodic fragment, strings articulated, plucked by hand. The sensation is of rabbit hole panic building through an insistent repetition. Through their work, we meet the inescapable. Levy's music, along with the careful and haunting soundscape expertly constructed by designer Johnny Byrne, are integral to the texture of this film. And without these aspects, Zone of Interest would not be what it is. When shooting Zone of Interest, Glazer and his cinematographer Łukasz Żal employed a naturalistic feel, forgoing any film lighting. Interior scenes were shot with hidden cameras placed around the house, while the crew worked away from set to give the feeling of surveillance and culpability, such as when a character walks through the hallway of their home at night and is seen through the open doorway of a nearby darkened room. This process was also created a different atmosphere for the actors themselves. Watching this film, I was particularly stirred by the material details. I could feel the smooth stone steps beneath my feet, touch the wrought iron banister, smell the fresh linens hanging on the line. The particulars of clothing and home help bring the story to life, giving the feeling of a world in the present and not of the past. In a panel discussion at Lincoln Center, Christian Friedel spoke of one crucial direction given to him by Jonathan Glazer. If you speak the truth, then lie with your eyes, and if your eyes speak the truth, then lie with your mouth, he said. And so it is made clear that despite scrubbed floors and pink cheeks, starched white linens, and impeccably shined shoes, there is no escaping the gas chamber dust or the horror-filled screams. The insidious truth reveals itself at every turn, and the more they try to ignore it, the louder it becomes, eating them from inside. Jonathan Glazer was originally drawn to this subject with an idea to make a film about the barrier wall. Thinking, as he said in a press conference at Cannes, about, quote, how we compartmentalize things for our own convenience, unquote. Writing about the wall brings me back to a story from Roman Polanski's boyhood, when he lived in the Jewish ghetto and Nazi-occupied Krakow, roughly an hour's drive from where this story takes place. When Polanski learned to sneak in and out of the ghetto, he did so habitually. The first time he left, he was amazed to discover that the other side of the ghetto wall was completely different. The smooth exterior was a world apart from the coarse ghetto interior. In his autobiography, he wrote, quote, it was like walking through a mirror and emerging on the other side, entering a different world complete with streetcars and people leading normal lives, unquote. In an interview about his film, The Pianist, Polanski talked about a screening he held for his cast and crew. The actors who played Nazis arrived without their costumes, showing their everyday selves. Seeing them in this light gave Polanski a moment's pause, coming to what he referred to as the, quote, realization that anyone is capable of anything at a given time in history, unquote. I've heard people react negatively to this quote, but I believe it is food for thought. As with this quote, the zone of interest makes us think about ourselves, or at least I believe it should. In a recent panel discussion after a screening of her revolutionary film work, Green Border, Polish filmmaker Agnieszka Holland spoke about the importance of self-reflection on what she referred to as, quote, the existential level. She continued, we have to ask the questions about our own borders, what we can accept, what we cannot, what we are afraid of, how much we see others as human beings, and how much they are the threat to us. Though Green Border may be a very different film from The Zone of Interest, it addresses similar issues relevant to our past, but also to our world today. The complacency with which we can ignore the plights of strangers and even the atrocities across the way arise in our reality in both little and big ways. Glazer wanted, quote, to try and show these people as people and not as monsters. He continued by saying, again, quote, the great crime and tragedy is that human beings did this to other human beings. It's very convenient for us to try and distance ourselves from them as much as we can, because obviously we think we could never behave this way and we don't behave this way, but I think we should be less certain in that, unquote. Perhaps the reverence for beauty in this film is meant to underscore the insidious ways in which all of us turn a blind eye, how we take comfort in our own ignorance, and as Miss Holland suggests, we become like ostriches burying our heads in the sand. The zone of interest, or the Interessengebiet, was a real place. It was given this name by the Nazis when they decided to create their camps on this land, and they did. And people lived there, and many people died there, including Rudolf Hess, who was convicted and hung on the Auschwitz grounds after the war. Jonathan Glazer, Mika Levy, Łukasz Żal, Johnny Byrne, and their cast and crew have managed to present us with a palpable warning. I ask myself if we can heed their call. And with that, I want to say thank you for listening. This was quite a long talk, but it's a very powerful and important film. And I appreciate you. This is the Impatient Moviegoer. I'm Julia Ain-Krupa. Keep watching movies. Keep looking for the beauty in life. Don't give up. Thank you so much. Till next time. Take care.